Welcome, everyone. So glad to have you here. We have my good friend, Amy Gutman. Hello, Amy. How are you?
Hi, Joy. Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My sister,
You're
by the way, might be popping in. She's on the road, but she might come
awesome. Okay, great.
in.
So Amy is a pediatric OT and neurodevelopment specialist. She's going to be sharing some amazing strategies today to help us create an anti-anxiety preschool classroom. So tell me first, like before we dive into that, like tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I am the example of some of the kids that you might have in your preschool that had anxiety. I grew up with lots of anxiety and nobody knew about it, honestly. I was able to fake it. I was a little bit shy. Everyone called me shy, but I was really suffering with physiological anxiety, which is different than psychological anxiety. So we're going to talk about how you can make those classrooms better for those kiddos. Anyway, I went through school. Life was great. I studied finance, was a Wall Street trader out on the commodities exchange. And I decided that while I was doing finance, I was really suffering with my quality of life. I studied
Ah,
OT and it healed my anxiety. And right now, and by the way, my anxiety was the type where, like, if the chicken touched the rice, I was done. If
no
I didn't
way.
know where I was going or if I didn't know what to expect, I was finished. I would ramble. I would have
Wow.
perceptive thoughts. If I grew up in this generation, I would have a diagnosis already by the age of
Mm,
5 because that's what
yeah.
we do now instead of understanding development. So I was really suffering.
Mm.
And that's what led me here. And my sister, we really started working with our kids. My life was spared after 9/11. I dropped out of Wall Street and decided to have a higher purpose in my life and do
Wow.
OT full time.
Mm.
We learned about the brain and the body, and that's where we're here. And we've
Yeah.
been treating kids for over 25 years, and the preschool environment has changed dramatically.
Mm.
And there are a lot more of our little kiddos who are now suffering with anxiety. And I'm so
Wow.
grateful to be here to share some concepts that are maybe a little bit unique for some of your members and some of your audience. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Oh, so glad you're here. I mean, this is obviously near and dear to my heart. My kiddo has also some sensory things that he struggles with. And so that's definitely something that, I know we're going to be talking about, sensory diets and also just how to include those who have sensory disorders, more inside of your classroom, how to kind of help regulate them. And then also just kind of help bring that anxiety down, especially with teachers too. So let's just dive into it. Thank you so much for sharing your background. And where also, hello everyone who's in the comments. Hello, Erica, Tammy, Juliet, Beth, Mary, Angie. So good to see you, Tamiko. Be sure to ask any questions in the comments that you have. We're going to definitely do a Q&A at the very end. So where would you like to start, Amy?
So I think one of the first things to understand is that anxiety could actually be normal. And we want to talk about the kids who are having it in an abnormal way. So I thought I would differentiate that and then talk about the environments for both.
Okay.
So let's get started right off the bat. So kids coming into preschool are anxious. They're anxious about leaving home. They're anxious about making friends. This is typical developmental anxiety. The children that we want to think about and who may be a little bit nuanced and we don't know what to do are those kids who are either shut down, they're
Mm,
completely frozen. A lot of our kids may have something called selective mutism. I don't see the comments. I'm not sure how many folks are resonating with that, but they're able to talk at home, but in school they're quiet. They're not as friendly. They're not as personable. And
wow.
then we have the children who are highly dysregulated. They're emotional. They're crying a little bit more intense than what their peers are doing.
Yeah.
And frankly, for anyone who's out there that resonates, you're feeling these children a lot more. You can even get a little bit, they're feeding off your energy. So if you're having a hard day, you know that those kiddos are also going to feed off you. Those are our highly sensitive children.
Mm,
Now, there are three reasons why children may have what we call a physiological anxiety. It's not coming from a psychological trauma like neglect or being bullied or being abused. It's coming from a disconnect between their brain and body. And there are three reasons why that happens. You touched on one, Joy, sensory integration. So
yeah.
we actually have 8 senses, not 5. I don't know if you know that. Did you know that?
No, too many for me to. I'm like, what is the five? First off, yeah.
Okay, so the first 5 are the ones we know. Our sense of sight, our sense of hearing, our sense of smell, taste, and touch.
Hmm.
Now, we have 3 senses that are hidden but just
Mm,
as functional. Our vestibular system, which is our sense of balance,
hmm.
our proprioceptive system, which is awareness of where we are in space,
Mm.
and our interoceptive system. How do the inner body muscles and organs communicate with our minds and body? I'm going to get into detail a little bit with that because those three touch on anxiety more than you would imagine. When you're not feeling balanced or our little children are having a hard time with their vestibular system, in the brain, it is connected directly to their sense of emotions. So they're going to be urgent. They're going to be fighting you. They're going to be shut down, frozen. That fight or flight response is directly connected to that vestibular system.
Mm.
The children who don't know where they are in space are the ones twiddling their hair, sucking their thumb, holding and chewing that crayon or that sleeve like it's for dear life.
Yeah.
They're getting into fights without any reason sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And they cry and they're emotional. They don't have awareness of where they are. So when they twiddle their hair or suck their thumb, they're able to regulate themselves and get a sense of where they are physically in space.
Mm-hmm.
And the last system that impacts is the interoception, which is the idea of those kids with headaches, stomach problems. They're not sleeping well. You in your preschools are seeing these kids. You're like wondering, do they ever sleep? They're the ones who are impacted by screen time a little bit more than the others.
Mm.
They're really, truly impacted on an inner level. So that's sensory. The second reason why they could be affected is reflexes. And that's a little bit more nuanced, and we get a little bit more in detail with our learnings, but we're all born as children and babies with reflexes that we have that allow us to survive that first year of life. And then they go away once we're walking and hopping around and doing what we need to do.
Yeah.
For some children, they still have some of those reflexes. I know I suffered with that. And they will be in a heightened sense of urgency and fear. Research shows that these reflexes are directly connected to emotional responses.
Mm.
And there are things that our preschool teachers can set up the environment to help them with. So I'm going to delve into that.
Awesome.
And the last reason why is because of neurochemicals and neurotransmitters. We don't have to worry about that because dopamine and serotonin is supposed to be a little haywire for these kids until pre-puberty. So we're not going to delve too deeply into that. So we're going to talk about those two other areas in the environment. I just wanted to get those terms out for anyone who doesn't have familiarity with them.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I've heard a lot of the terms, especially vestibular with my own kiddo, my own kiddo. But it's good to like remind myself of that. And honestly, I didn't know anything about it until we went to the OT and, got the diagnosis and we're like, oh, I didn't even know that like balance could cause such an issue with people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I will tell you as an adult, when I had an ear infection and I had some crystals get out of my ear, I was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. My husband thought that he was living with some totally different person. I was not a stable mom. I'm a very regulated person right now. I can, even if I'm not always, again, regulation does not mean being calm. It means being able to tap into presence. So I just want to remind all of us out there that when we see our children crying and being upset, it doesn't mean that they're not regulated. It's when it's overly extreme. Like if someone got a boo-boo or fell down, let them cry. That's okay. But it's when it goes too far or when they can't catch their breath or it's too extreme.
Totally. Yeah.
But anyway, when I had those ears, those canals out there, my balance was off and I was a different person, impulsive, moody. I mean, I want to tell you, your sense of smell, people don't know this, but your sense of smell can directly impact your impulsivity. So the children who you see that are maybe, I know we're talking about anxiety, but very impulsive, might just be hypersensitive to smell. And it's really powerful to have this information because then we don't have to treat them only behaviorally. We can change the environment that can help them feel better about themselves and more in control. And that makes their lives easier and honestly our lives too, because we're not managing them anymore.
Yeah. Well, you brought up like such a good point that yes, we're talking about anxiety, but there's like all the underlining components that can create or rather intensify, right? Because we all will, like you said, have some anxiety in our lives. That's just life, but intensify it to a point where it's not manageable. It's not regulated. So awesome. I love what you're saying there.
Yeah. And, I want to say that, this term anxiety, and I put it in quotes, is because by the age of 4 or 5, depending 3 to 5, I think that's like typically the age of the preschool years, these children are being diagnosed earlier and earlier with anxiety. But in my experience, they don't have a clinical definition of anxiety truly based on what the DSM-5 is saying. They're having it more on these physiological responses that they're only being challenged now because they're in school and they have peer relationships. They have their learning skills that are being tested. So anxiety could really just be that, why don't we recognize that they're just not comfortable in their own skin? And we have the power to view them and honor that behavior in a way that's not a frightening thing, because they're not feeling in control. So when parents or teachers are, getting overwhelmed themselves and feeding off that, because it's hard for us to watch that and to manage and do everything else we need to do as teachers, it's very important for us to recognize that there is a way to redirect what that child is experiencing by knowledge and by implementing some of these techniques that I hope to share with you. So each of these systems are unique. They all work together. And I'm just grateful that there's more awareness out there about that. Like, you knew about the vestibular system, but maybe you didn't know about the Moro reflex, which is that reflex that's
Right.
connected to anxiety. And here it makes sense. Like, we don't have to worry about our kids having that big diagnosis that dooms them for generation for the next 20 years. We can actually help them in a way that's possible. And I'm not even saying treat them. We don't have to treat them. We can just talk to them or change the environment to help them, which is powerful.
Mhm. Oh, that's awesome. One thing that always stuck out to me was, as you're a mom and things like that, and you see your kiddos and they're having meltdowns, and so many times we're just like, stop crying, it's not a big deal. Like, or we're trying to minimize obviously what they're going through. I saw this, like, some post somewhere, where maybe some video, anybody, they're basically like, we have bad days all the time, but we don't allow our children to have bad days or bad moments, right? And it was like, holy cow, like, I'm putting this ridiculous, I don't know what the word is, but like, expectation on my kiddos, that, like, oh, you have to have like a happy attitude the whole time, you have to be like, just positive the whole time. Meanwhile, like, I'm going through mood swings like crazy, right? I'm crying here and there. And it's interesting, because while they may have a very outward way to show their emotion, because they haven't maybe internalized some of the dialogue, that we hold back some of that emotion because we're processing it. So it doesn't mean that they're just, some kiddos obviously need a lot more help with regulation, like you said, but always give grace to the kiddo, that's having some emotion and things like that, because, man, I think we all need grace in our own life too. All right,
100%. I just want to say
it.
one more point on that. And also remember, they don't have the language always, right? Like, we've been already experiencing and living life. They don't even know what it is that's getting on their nerves. You can say, I had a rough day, my hair is not doing well. I didn't, I had a bad situation, a hard conversation with my partner. They don't know how to express these emotions. They don't know how to tap into that. So anyway, go ahead.
So let me ask you this. So one of the things that I have kind of come across is, deep breathing. And I do want to get into your things. But one of the things I came across was like deep breathing, and how, like, if we all learned how to deep breathe, it would literally change the world. We'd all have more, calm nervous systems. And what's interesting though, yes, and I'd love your perspective on this, because at one point I was like, that's the only way, like, deep breathing, and the only way we're going to solve this. But then if we step back just a second, that's a great tool. But if we step back, if we're not even addressing any of the underlying concerns with the senses, etc., we're just putting a Band-Aid on it for the moment. Would you like walk me through, if that makes sense? And yeah.
100%. So I want to explain that, this is one of the philosophies that we have, that every single brain is unique based on their profile and what works. So when we're talking about anxiety, breathing does not work. By the way, not just for the kids, but also for our adults out there. I am sure that there are folks listening who are like, they're just not yogis. They're not connecting to yoga or deep breaths. And like, they'd rather run or go, be writing in a journal or maybe dancing to music. For children who we're encouraging self-regulation through breathing, which, by the way, is very powerful, if they don't have awareness of their joints and bodies, when they're breathing, the oxygen is not going to where it needs to, which is that lower brainstem, to regulate and give us those good feelings. It's going to compensate for the movements that they want. If you're breathing and you're moving, you're not getting deep breath. And they may need some basic foundational presence that's coming from the outside. Like you mentioned, Joy, these kids are showing us that they have needs, but sometimes there are those who are shut down. And when they can't catch a full breath, this reflex that I'm talking about, for example, if a child has this reflex and you ask them to breathe, they will hiccup, they will cry sometimes, they will cough. You'll see them like breathing like exaggerated breaths. They're not able to tap into that. And instead of us forcing a method or a technique on a child, let's try and look at them and say, for those of you who want to take a breath, go for it. But how much more powerful could it be to have them do their deep breaths while maybe clasping their hands, or giving them different ideas of blowing bubbles, which is
Yep.
only the external, the exhalation
Mhm.
of breath, instead of having them inhaling. They're not up to that. So why are
Mm,
we pushing that? They're not going to get regulated from those deep breaths as much as we push them for it. And
awesome.
I know in our programming, we want to try and encourage self-regulation for majority of our classroom. But for those kids who are struggling, it's just not worth it. They get
Yeah.
frustrated and it just triggers them even more.
Yeah. Well, and when you've got all the other students in the class, it's very difficult to, spend as much time as you need with that one kiddo to help them de-escalate. I don't think any amount, if you've got one teacher and a class full of students and I know, you have a kiddo who's just, very upset and needs to have a significant amount of time to help them de-escalate. I just don't know that many teachers out there are able to offer that assistance without all the chaos also going on in the classroom that will also struggle with the kiddo. So
Well,
if you're
I also have
ready,
a tip.
yeah,
I have a tip for that actually.
go
So
for it.
before you do your deep breathing or any kind of regulatory program that you're trying to do with your kiddos, something you could do is do physical heavy movement with them before.
Yes.
So have them bounce some balls. You can give them a little ball. You can have them just do some push-ups on the wall, on the floor.
Hmm.
Have them do some of these brain gym exercises where they can really activate themselves,
Hmm.
and then allow them to step into the breathing or regulatory responses. You'll weed out a little bit just that intense difficulty for those who need that outside feeling of having a presence of space before being told to focus on their breath.
Yeah,
So I don't know if that helps anyone out there, but that's a good
totally.
tip.
Yeah, I remember one thing that really helped my son was just pushing heavy objects, or even putting the vacuum on the lowest setting for the floor and just really having to pull and push, things like that.
And if you know, for example, that some of your kiddos are sensitive to noise, if they're going to
Well,
have to,
yes. No
if
vacuum, probably the preschool classroom, but at home.
but if they're going to have to take a deep breath, you know what's happening in their brain? They're hearing the ambulance that's 2 blocks away. Yep. When
Interesting.
breath is, yes. So your best bet is to allow those children that you know are anyway sensitive to noise to put on some heavy set earphones and then do your regulatory responses.
Interesting.
Squash that, because breathing, when we breathe, we become more aware of our environment, which brings in the space of our cells
Hmm.
to disconnect and stop the processing that's happening in our brain. For those children, when they stop the processing that's happening, if they're highly sensitive, all of them go up. So their sense of smell, their sense of sight, their
Yeah.
sense, we close their eyes typically, but if they're having a sensitivity to sound,
Mm,
boom, they're more hyper and it doesn't work.
mm.
And that's something that we really need to start bringing into our classrooms as part of the mode of understanding that there's a way to kind of allow them to feel that, even for a couple of moments, where it's not escalating their behavior, it's letting them calm down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's another point. I would say also something else to think about is that for your children who move around a lot, right? We talk about that vestibular system. They may actually have that physiological anxiety I was talking about.
Mhm.
So investing in 5 or 6 vestibular discs and rotating it in your classroom with those children, giving them subtle input where it's not interfering with everyone. And what I always recommend is the child who you think needs it the most, give it to them always and rotate it with everyone else because everybody wants to try it. That can help them when they're having to do these kind of activities or learn or engage in social engagement where they're too overwhelmed by that. So really just trying to see what is the child showing you in their behavior. Like when they're going like this, it's a hypersensitivity. If
Mm,
you see that after lunch, children are much more shut down or they're impulsive,
mm.
start the idea of understanding and asking the children, is lunchtime hard for you? Are there too many smells? And then what you can do is just make sure that that child has time to eat his lunch, or if there's tuna fish or something strong in the air, away from that area in a very normalized way. You're
Mm.
helping them not get activated and you're helping as well yourself not to have to deal with the repercussions of what's happening
Sure.
after lunch. So
Yeah.
there are so many different ways to kind of look at the behavior. What are they showing us? If we would honor their behavior
Hmm.
and not excuse it to what we assume, one of the things we always say is you don't assume, you have to test to a test. We have to know really what's going on. We have to look at them. We have to be detectives because these children are not always expressing. I get dizzy every time you do the alphabet and you're teaching me ABCs. My eyes are spinning. Who is
Hmm.
saying that? What
Right.
4-year-old is coming up and saying that?
Yeah.
That you can learn ways and trying to, kind of ask them these questions. You ever get dizzy when we're reading or learning? And they're like, yeah, and they're like, I don't even know what dizzy is. And you could say, dizzy means that the room is spinning, or maybe you feel
Mhm.
like you're falling sometimes when you're reading. That's
Yeah.
powerful. That's
Hmm.
powerful. That's why they're not learning, or they're shutting down and they're frozen and they don't want to answer. It's not because they don't know and they're not smart. They're just overwhelmed. They're not
Yeah.
comfortable. So, yeah, that's another idea I was thinking about.
So you're talking about vestibular discs, right? Is those are just like the things that you can kind of like rock on, just for
Yes.
people who don't know, especially me, that word. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So there are like these, instead of sitting on a medicine ball or an exercise ball,
Mhm.
they create these nice little vestibular discs that are very subtle. You can put it on the chairs,
They're
whatever
about
kind of
what, this high, right?
this
With a
high and
little
like
curve.
down.
Yep. Yep.
I'm
Okay, I've
not in
got
my
it.
office now. I would be pulling it out right now, but
I
it's a
had
little.
one. Yep, in the day. Yep.
Okay. And they're great for some kids. And for some kids, they agitate them. So don't buy it for your whole classroom.
Right.
Try to do a rotation base. And then, try and see if the parent does need it. Recommend they do it before they come to school, off the bus. Oh my. Does your community have mostly bus service, or it's like mixed? Like you
No,
don't know?
it's all families driving their kiddos.
Yeah,
It's just
okay.
preschool, not daycare. Yeah.
Great. So let me tell you, with preschool, the car ride to preschool can be impacting the children. Just getting into the car and getting to school. For those with vestibular issues, being in a car can be stimulatory. So
Mm-hmm.
if any of your parents, like one of the questions that we always recommend for those who are taking care of some preschool students is, in your application process, ask the parents, does your child get car sick? And if they say yes, even if it's a short drive to
Right.
school, give those children heavy movement, like what you were describing,
Mm-hmm.
pushing, heavy lifting, carrying
Mm-hmm.
books from one end to the other,
Yes.
doing
Yes.
some jumping, because just that simple 1 minute, 5 minute, 20-minute ride can
Mm-hmm.
totally deregulate them as well.
Mm.
So that's something to also think about as far
Yeah.
as like that vestibular system.
Well, and I love how you said, when they come, give them, and I loved when you talked about, just moving books and disguising it as, hey, can you help me with this? Instead of like, oh, I can see that you're having an issue. We need to go do XYZ. And then it becomes this thing to the kid that they're like, I don't want to do that. But they're like, hey, let's go get the books, and you're bringing the kiddo with you. And then, like, okay, let's go move them here. You grab some and they grab some, stuff like that. If we can incorporate that. Before we go any further, we're kind of wrapping up here. I do want to let everybody know that's on our call. Thank you so much for being here. And then also, if you have any questions for Amy, please put them in the chat so we can ask her. Is there other things you'd like to share with us before we go to Q&A?
So one of the other, if you
Oh, just a second. It looks like her connection may have dropped for a sec. Okay, she'll come back in. Let me just message her. One moment here. Okay, so one thing I'll share really quick while we're waiting for her to come back in is this is something I didn't know about, which was, oh, here she is. Okay, we're going to bring her back in. And then maybe I'll add that at the end. Hey, Amy, all doing good?
the anxiety was hiking, getting up there a little bit.
Yeah, do you have anything else to share?
Yeah, so the only other thing I wanted to mention is that, again, if you as a preschool teacher are having a hard day, they're feeding off you. Just their nervous systems are immature. Take that moment, take that breath, get regulated, and things like that. And we could talk about, if you want me to mention now about what we're doing next week, or I can do it at the end. That would be fine. So let me take some questions though, if there are. I can't see them. Is that
Yeah,
something?
no worries. Yeah, we
Okay.
don't have any questions coming in, but
Okay.
and of course, we're going to talk about your boot camp coming up. But before we do that, let's give a couple tips on how we as teachers, when we come into that environment, like we can bring our entire day and it could be really heavy for us. And of course, we're bringing that onto the kiddos, which is going to be pretty stressful for them. Or we can leave it at the door. But how do we get to that point of leaving it at the door? Could you let us know just a couple tips? I know we're going to go deeper into it in your boot camp, but a couple tips that we as adults can bring in how can we regulate ourselves a little bit better before we show up to the kiddos?
Amazing. So I want to just share one point. The first thing that I'm going to mention is that when you're walking in, if you know you had a hard day, I don't know, you're hormonal, you're pregnant, you're in menopause, whatever it might be, you're a woman, okay, having a rough day, or if you had something that you can connect right away, that you had a fight or a disagreement or something got you on edge, before you enter that door, before the kids come in, acknowledge and allow yourself to say that that was happening before my precious souls are entering this room. And I'm going to deal with that later. And I'm saying say it, not just think it, actually
Yeah.
say it. If you're not that kind of person, write it down. There's a lot of power in disconnecting by putting out there and really acknowledging what it is we're feeling. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because your physiology changes in the moment that you do that, even if you haven't resolved it. So that's number one. And then number two is figure out and discover, are you food dependent? Do you need to have your coffee before the kids come? Do you need to be able to have 10 minutes on the clock to journal or read? Own that to a religious component, like no matter what, you're doing it, or like the pure habit. I don't know, but we try not to walk out of the house without brushing our teeth or putting on clothing.
Yep.
That's what it is. Like that 5 or 10 minutes, you're going to do what you need. And arrive, if you can, to school a little bit earlier, just so you have that. And the last thing to do is powerful with our children is in the moment, right when they come in, if you can already feel yourself, if you as a teacher are highly sensitive, don't even talk to the child. Take a deep breath and exaggerate in front of them. It will help regulate yourself and the child, and then say good morning. And this will work, by the way, even if they're in that high meltdown state. By taking a deep breath, we stop a part of the brain within ourselves, and the child will feed off that. Even if they're crying, they'll stop for a second. They may go back to crying, but they will stop because they'll feed off that. Our children are co-regulating with us to an extreme. So let's honor ourselves and them in that moment. So taking those couple of ideas hopefully will help you in kind of disconnecting before you start your day.
I love that. And I know those are only 2 tips and, they're amazing, but I know that there's really kind of a system behind this that you've developed, as a pediatric OT and neurodevelopment specialist, you and, is it Evelyn, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and so you've both, developed this system that you wanna walk people through, and you're doing a boot camp, and I'm super pumped for you to talk about it. I'm gonna drop the link in the comment right now. Be sure to go register for her boot camp right after this. But go ahead, Amy, tell us all about this boot camp that's coming up next week.
Amazing. Thank you. So we do once a year an annual event for the community. And this year we're doing this boot camp, which is going to be focusing on identifying the root cause of anxiety within a person, within those who are around you. So if you're a mom, a preschool teacher, or you're trying to think of the kiddos that you treat, help you to determine what the root cause is. Is it psychological, physiological, situational, or environmental? And then what we're going to do over the 4 days is not just talk theory, because that's something that we can always get. We're going to be implementing quick fixes as well as getting starting on helping you on that journey to treat them in a holistic way. And there's a lot of power in that, because we need to honor the different brain profiles and the different physiologies that are out there and understand them. And I think for your community, it's so critical, not only because you are honestly the first time that these children are getting into this stressful situation of school and learning with other children, you have the opportunity to kind of help screen and see who needs something else and who's going to work with these physiological processes. So we're going to teach you guys how to do that, give you a quick fix, as well as take you a little bit deeper. It's a boot camp. I know it's scary, that word, but we are wanting to initiate you. If you can't make it live, we are going to have recordings. There's going to be community. For those of you who want to delve deeper, there's even a VIP session. My sister and I are committing the whole week just to being present with our community all around to help you guys get started and saying goodbye to the anxieties that you don't really understand fully, and hacking it right away off the bat. So I'm looking forward. We're really, really psyched for it. And I hope that, we'll have lots of folks coming and helping not just themselves, but also the children that they're around. And I do want to mention, if anyone in your community has a parent or a child you're worried about, recommend it to the parents. Sometimes that's a great way to segue. As preschool teachers, sometimes our parents are not so receptive. to
Yeah.
hearing that. They're like, no, they'll grow out of it. Well, you know what? That term, they'll grow out of it, is actually true. Sometimes we have to give kids time. But
Mhm.
sometimes what we're saying when they say grow out of it is that their central nervous system hasn't developed or matured. Well, for those kids, we do want to get in early before they have their self-esteem affected, before the learning issues and the social issues come into play.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really what our goal is, to kind of prevent anxiety and these challenges from coming in later on. Thank
That's
you for allowing me to share that with the community.
Oh, of course. And Amy, we're so glad to have you here. I know that I've learned a lot, and I already know some of these words, but it still was allowed me to go deeper and really solidify some things. There was one thing I wanted to. Oh no! So everybody, I just dropped the link in the chat, so you can go join her boot camp that's coming up next week. What I love about boot camps is it's really like a close environment, a really like sheltered environment where you guys can actually make a lot of progress in just those couple of days, versus like, oh, I'm just going to go watch some course somewhere, or that you never open up again. But a boot camp is so it's like it can be definitely transformational. I know that every challenge that we do is obviously transformational, and this is no different. And I really think, like, if you think about your future and your children's future and your students' future, like how much, if you just learn one tip, right? One tip to help regulate yourself better, how is that going to impact your own life? How's that going to impact those who are around you, your relationships, and especially to the students in your classroom? If you only learn one tip that is going to help you interact with your children a different way, or help your child to help regulate themselves, or even in that classroom setting, I ran preschool for 10 years, 1,000 students, and there were absolutely some kiddos in the school that it was like, wow, they are really struggling with a lot of things. And had I had some of the knowledge that I now have, that kiddo would have had such a, I wouldn't say it's easy, but I definitely say they would have had an improved experience, because they'd have someone who'd have more strategies. And I don't think, like, we don't always have the OT background like you, Amy, right? Like, we don't know all these things that don't come naturally to us. I think just, sometimes our background, our experiences, our programming that we've already had in our life just kind of naturally comes out. Sometimes we need to get the, some extra strategies that are proven to really help. So just imagine, like, what is the value of being able to have one of those, even just one, right? That's going to, honestly, it can literally transform you, your life, your student, or just any other person in your family. So I'm going to drop the link again. I just want to reflect to you, Amy. We've got Barbie who says, such great content. Thank you so much. We'll be checking out the boot camp as well. Kimberly says, this looks awesome. Rosalind says, great information. And then, so amazing. So Amy, any last thoughts that you'd like to share?
So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing that important point, and just re-emphasizing that you guys hold the power to so many children's lives and their future. I remember my preschool teacher, and I'm in my 40s, and I know that the kindness and the love and the support she gave me was why I didn't develop those concepts. But how grateful would I have been if she would have let me kind of be able to push through those years with a little bit of that knowledge. So I just want to thank your audience. That's the final thought. You guys are angels in my mind, and being present and being here tonight. And I know the timing is rough. End of the year, you have all of your summer plans to figure out. This might be the exact time to commit to doing the boot camp.
Well, and Amy, that's
right?
really cool, because like the way that I just thought of it just now is like, okay, we can actually practice this in real time, right? It's not like, okay, we're going fine, like I'll just save that strategy for later. But it's like, yep, there's some chaos going on. We can naturally feel that anxiety building up because it is end of year. We got summer vacation right around the corner, but like, let's practice this in real time and let's see it work in our lives, like literally on day one. So I love that.
All right. Thank you so much, Joy. Really such a pleasure being with you. And I love the energy that your community has. And I'm looking forward to sharing more with all of y'all.
Wonderful.
So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you, Amy. And for those of you who are listening on the podcast or watching on YouTube, just click the link in the description, and you can be able to jump over to her boot camp. Remember, it starts next week, and we will see you there. All right, Amy. Thank you again.
Bye-bye. Take care now.